Hey, before we start, I just want to let you know this video is a bit longer than my normal videos. There was no way I could make this one short while still kind of going into things the way I wanted to. So if this is too long for you, you can skip this one and jump into the next one. Okay, enjoy the video. Hey, so today I want to talk about a few different programming languages that I'm sort of interested in and compare them a little bit, like what I like about them, what I maybe don't like so much about them, when I would reach for one or the other. And I think the best way to do that is to look at the same program written in 5 different languages. So a few months back, I made a little program called Sark, which works like this. You type Sark, you give it a sentence. So I think you are right, like that. And then it returns the text sarcastically, like that. And there's a few little gotchas with this. And we're going to be looking at it in Go, JavaScript, PHP, Python, and Bash. Shell script, but this is Bash. I'm pretty sure that it's not POSIX compliant. In fact, I'm almost certain it's not POSIX compliant. Okay, so let's look at this program very quickly again. So it takes in a string like this, I think you're right, turns it to I think you are right, like that. Okay, so the rules of Sark are a little bit more complicated than you might think they are. So let me give you an example. I'm never going to do that. Okay, like that. There we go. Yeah, that looks perfect. I'm never going to do that, okay? So I is lowercase. Now, this next character is not alphabetical, so we don't uppercase or lowercase, and now we go back to uppercase, M. Then we've got a space, and now lowercase, uppercase, like that, lowercase, space. All right, so punctuation we have to sort of ignore. So it's not every other character you switch, it's every other alphabetical character you actually switch. So I actually found a pretty cool little test runner called Tush, which I don't think has been updated in like 9 years, but it works perfectly. So let me show you how this works. So I've got my test code right here, which is just how do you run the command and what's the expected output. So $, and then pipe, $, pipe. So I've got it in shell script, Go, Python, JavaScript, PHP, and it should always return the exact same thing. And let me just try it here. So tush, check, test, and it works, so you don't get any output. So anyways, at least I've confirmed that all these programs do actually work. Okay, I'm going to start off with JavaScript because I think that's probably the language that most people are kind of know. It's sort of the lingua franca of the web, as they say. So I'm starting off with a shebang and then user bin env node, which means I'm running this with node, which is JavaScript on the server. So first thing I really like about JavaScript is the way that you can destructure arrays. So process.argv is how I'm getting the arguments, right? So whatever you pass to the command line argument. And I don't want the first 2 arguments because the first 2 arguments, so 0 and first index, the first argument is, I believe, just node. And the second argument is the path to the Sark file. I don't want those. I only want the things that come after that. So args like that. And I think this is actually very, very clean. Look at these, you just got 2 commas there and you're not assigning any variables. You're just ditching them like that. I really like that. Okay, so on line 4, I have, maybe an array of strings, and now I want to separate this into individual strings. So JavaScript has a very convenient map function. So I'm taking every argument, I'm trimming it, and then at the very end, I'm joining them all together with an empty space. So that just gives me a sentence. I think that's very clean, very readable, and I'm super, super happy with it. On line 6, I want to see, is my string empty? So in JavaScript, I can just say, if there's not a string, right, not text, and so what does that mean? Well, that means that it's a falsy value. So my string has a value of either, so it's either not a string, so it's null or undefined, or it's just an empty string. And so there we go. If it's an empty string, we exit out like that. Okay, now we're going to set some variables. I've got let uppercase equals true, let output equals true, because let in JavaScript means that the reference to this variable can be changed, right? So should uppercase can be changed and output can be changed. Next, I'm turning the text back into an array, right? Now it's nice and trimmed and perfect. I am then iterating over every character and checking, okay, is it alphabetical? If it is, then switch to uppercase, right? If it's not, then don't do anything. And then the other time, if it's alphabetical, switch to lowercase. And then finally, if I should uppercase them, so I've got this ternary here, right? Should I uppercase? Yeah, then, append the uppercase letter. Should I not uppercase? Okay, append the lowercase letter and then output the entire thing. Okay, so you're probably familiar with JavaScript. You probably could have written this yourself. Let me just show you that it actually does work. This is JavaScript, JavaScript like that. So it actually does work. No real surprises here. So a few great things. I think that JavaScript is pretty expressive. I like its arrow functions. I like its ternaries. I generally find it pretty easy to read. Now, maybe that's because this is the language that I feel like I know the best. One major downside to this is that this is the slowest program of any of the scripts that I'm writing today, only because of Node's startup time, right? I think once Node gets going, it's fairly fast, but the startup time, I think it's like 0.8 seconds or something like that. Or anyway, it's significantly slower than any of the other languages. Okay, the next language we're going to look at is Python. So Python and JavaScript in some ways are very similar languages. There's people who would hate me for saying that, but some ways that they're very similar. So they're both interpreted. They're both dynamically typed languages. And when I'm writing them, it often kind of feels the same. So let's take a look here. So a few differences. First of all, I have to actually import things in Python, whereas in JavaScript, so far, I don't think you have to import anything that's included with JavaScript. So sys is part of the Python standard library, but you still have to import it. Whereas in JavaScript, I don't think there is actually anything like that. Now, let's look at this, because if you don't know Python, you're going to think this is wild, okay? So what am I doing here? This is what we call a list comprehension in Python. The way I think of list comprehensions is this is what you should reach for instead of your maps in Python. So Python does have a map, but this is apparently the Pythonic way of doing it. So sys.argv, this is similar to JavaScript's process.arg, right? In this case, I want all the arguments except for the first one. So that's what I'm doing right here. I'm grabbing all the arguments except for the first one. Okay, so for argument in all of the arguments except for the first one. That sounds like a for loop a little bit, right? And then I can get that arg here and then strip it. So strip is JavaScript's trim. Python, they use strip. Okay, so we are stripping it like that. So all of this work right here is exactly what I've done in my map there in JavaScript. And then here I'm using this empty string character and I'm joining based on that. Whereas in JavaScript, it's the other way around, right? You join on the array. So it's kind of backwards. But I think that's pretty cool. Now, if you look right here, you're going to see a type hint. And so I just said that this was a dynamically typed language, and that's true, right? But Python has type hints. Now, these are not like types in your statically typed languages. This is a suggestion, right? This is what this should be. So if I try and change this to int, and then I save it here. Okay, look, I have a program on my computer called MyPy, which is telling me like this is an incompatible type. Now Python doesn't care. I can still try and run this thing. There's no compilation step, but I can still run this thing. So this is just telling me sort of in my editor, hey, you probably did something wrong. So this is fairly new to Python, and it's pretty nice, but it's not like using TypeScript or using Golang, which we'll get into. It's not that kind of security. It's like, hey, we can help you a little bit, but we can't make any guarantees. So I would definitely recommend if you're writing Python, use type hints, but just know that you're going to have a lot of situations where you're dealing with code that doesn't have type hints, or maybe you've imported something, and then you just kind of have to do your best, right? Kind of define types as you're able to. Okay, look at line 7 and tell me that this is not beautiful. So this, I think, is pretty nice to read. If not text. So in JavaScript, we have if bang text, right? So if not text. In Python, we use the word not. Why not? And look at how you do an if condition, right? You just put a colon and then you indent a little bit. So Python's all is based on indentation as opposed to curly braces, right? The C style curly braces in JavaScript. In Python, we use indentation for that type of thing. So if not text, print this thing and then system exit, right? That's why I had to import system. I really like this. I would say that for me, this is much nicer than JavaScript. Okay, should uppercase equals true. You'll notice that I didn't have to use let or var or const. In Python, you just declare your variables. And your Booleans have capital letters. Isn't that fun? I don't know how I feel about that. I think I like it because it's kind of neat to say, oh, okay, yeah, it's got a capital T. That's something special. I don't know if I like it or not. Okay, on line 15, I have if character is alpha. So I'm checking, is this alphabetical? Now, how did I do that in JavaScript? Well, JavaScript doesn't have a nice is alpha like Python. So what did I do? I didn't mention this. I'm checking, okay, if the character to lowercase does not equal the character to uppercase, then it must be alphabetical, because if they're not the same, only alphabetical things can be different if they're lower and uppercase, right? So like a comma to lowercase and a comma to uppercase are going to be the same. That's kind of gross, right? But in Python, you say is alpha. Perfect, works nicely. And then should uppercase equals not should uppercase. There we go. Also, I should mention underscore, snake case keyword or snake case variable names. Really, I'm a big fan. I just think it reads really, really well. And then this is pretty similar to our ternary from before. But look at this, right? So output plus character dot upper, right? Character upper if should uppercase. Else, like this. Okay, to me, this is a little bit confusing, but it's output 1 if condition, otherwise output 2. That's very different than how you actually write this in any other language that I've written. Maybe Ruby has something like that, but I kind of like it. I don't know. I think it's pretty interesting. And then last, you just print out the output. Okay, no surprise there. Okay, so on the whole, which of these languages do I prefer? I would say probably I'm definitely faster with JavaScript, but I find Python more fun to write. Now, maybe that's just because it's new and it's fun to do new things. But in general, I just feel like Python feels a little bit nicer to write, feels a little bit cleaner, a little bit more expressive. So I really like it. But it doesn't have a very good static type system, right? So it does have those type hints, but it's not like TypeScript. It's not like Golang. So you don't get the same kind of type safety. You don't get the same kind of information from your editor as you do in those other languages. So I thought I might actually do a lot more Python, but now I'm starting to think, you know what, Python's pretty fun, but this might not be a language I want to spend a ton of time with going forward. Okay, I've talked about it a little bit already, but now I'm going to get into Golang. So of these languages, by far the fastest is Golang, right? At the end, it's a compiled language. You have a compiler. At the very end, you're building a binary and then you run it. Let's say Python on average ran in like 0.05 seconds, something like that. JavaScript ran in 0.8 seconds because of slow execution time. Go ran in 0.00 seconds if you average it out. Like it ran in almost no time, right? Very, very fast. Go is also by far the most verbose language that we'll be looking at today. It's much longer than anything else that we had to write. And some people would say that is a strength of Go. I'm not sure yet, but I can see what they mean by that. So let's take a look. So like Python, you have to import things. You actually have to declare the package name, whereas Python, it just does that dynamically based on the file. Okay, so here we go. I'm importing things, and then I create my main function. Again, you have to do this in Go. I can't just start typing code. And now let's take a look. So this looks very similar to Python. I'm getting all my arguments. Now, because this is a more verbose language, I felt like I had to start breaking things down into functions just so I had smaller pieces of code that are more expressive about exactly what I'm doing here. So I have created a function here. Now, let's look at this first. So text, comma equals args to string args. What's happening here? So text is my variable. I don't need to put const, let, or var. So this is similar to Python. Here, though, what I'm doing is I'm saying so create a variable, assign it to this value, and give it a static type, which is whatever you can infer this is. And because this is a nicely statically typed language, my editor can tell me lots of information. So I know that the result of this is going to be a string. So I know that this is a string. And once it's a string, you can't change it. I really like that. Just that safety that you get from these languages that I got from TypeScript. It's really hard to give that up once you've had it. Okay, so let's actually see what we're doing here in args to string. I said it was longer. It's actually not longer. I just feel like it's a little bit more verbose. So I am joining all the args. So strings.join. Again, more verbose, right? I'm using these strings. I'm importing from the strings module and doing join. And then I am also going to be trimming all of them as well. I'm importing from the strings module, and then I'm trimming the whole thing, and I'm returning that as a string. Okay, great. Now I need to check if it's empty. So far in JavaScript, I would just say if not text. In Python, if not text. In Golang, no way. You have to say if len text, right? So if length of text is 0, like I believe this is the right way to do this, right? So this is very verbose. If somebody wrote JavaScript like this, my assumption would be, okay, maybe they don't know the language that well. This is how you do it in Golang. And now I'm going to use my printer that I had to import just to print out that line. So everything's extremely explicit. Is that a better thing? I don't know. So the idea with Golang is that it's got a really small library. There's only one way to really do things because they don't give you tools to do it another way. I think that this is good. A lot of very smart people seem to like this. And that for me is a reason to dig more into it. Okay, let's look at this sarcastic text thing like this. We'll jump into it. Okay, so I've got my text string here. I'm creating my output, and the type of the output here is an array. Sorry, it's a slice. So in Go, an array is a preset number of elements. A slice is a dynamic number of elements. But this is not an array of characters, not an array of strings. It's an array of runes. And this is sort of like the character equivalent, but not really. There's a whole thing that you have to look up, but these are sort of numeric values that can be related to, different symbols, that type of thing. So it's more complicated, it's more explicit, probably more powerful, but is that trade-off worth it to you? That's a question that you kind of have to ask yourself as you're writing this type of thing. Okay, so should uppercase equals true. Okay, so on line 32, we're going to go through another for each loop, underscore, and then we got character. So I don't need the index, that's why I'm skipping this here. I've got a range of text. So this is not going to give me a list of characters. It's going to give me another slice of runes, maybe an array of runes, I'm not sure. And then if Unicode is letter, right? So again, like Python, you've got something really nice built in to say, is this a letter? Not some kind of JavaScript, let's say hackery, right? That has to do some weird things to figure out. It's very explicit. And I kind of like this. Also, if, like in Python, I don't need to wrap this in brackets, which is pretty nice, I think. Okay, and then if should uppercase, and then we append else output like that. Now, this is the first language that we've come to that doesn't have a ternary. And Go is pretty happy not to have a ternary because a lot of people hate ternaries and they think they're really, really hard to read. I really like ternaries in certain places. When I'm trying to assign either one value or another value, so it's a single line, I really like that ternary. They can be abused. I think in general they're worth having. Go has decided not to have them. So for the first time in a very long time, I'm using an else statement. I've kind of missed that else statement, but again, if I see an else statement in JavaScript, often I think, okay, this could probably be written in a cleaner way. So, it takes some getting used to. And then I have to convert my string, my slice or my array of runes to a string. Okay, and then the last thing I printed out like normal. So this language feels a lot different than the other two to me. It's compiled. It runs extremely fast. It's very portable in a way that the other two really aren't. Because if I want to run Python, I want to run a Python script, I have to have Python. If I want to run JavaScript script, I have to have, Node or something like Node, almost certainly Node. But that's not true of Go, right? Because I can create a binary. So you might be thinking, well, you wrote it in Python. Of course you have Python. But if you're thinking about, let's say I want to put this into some kind of pipeline or something like that, or a system that I don't really get to control too much, a binary might be nicer, right? If imagine you're deploying your web app, and instead of having to make sure you install Ruby or Python or PHP, you just throw up a binary and you say, there's my web app. That is very, very cool. I like that idea a lot, but it's not without its trade-offs, right? So who knows? Okay, now we're gonna look at easily the weirdest language on this list, and this is Bash script, right? Shell script, Bash. So there's a difference between shell script and Bash script. Generally, Bash script is a type of shell script, and you can do certain things in Bash that you can't do in other shell scripting languages. But in general, when people write scripts, I think that these days they're generally targeting what Bash can do. Not always, I know that, right? And that's one of the tricky things with these types of languages, that you have to be really careful what's running this, right? Because if I'm running this with SH, maybe, maybe it just won't run. It won't even work, right? If I'm running with Bash, it will. If I'm running with fish shell, it won't, that type of thing. And then even on your system, you might think, okay, I'm sending this to SH, so it's gonna run with SH. But under the hood, SH is actually just an alias for Bash. Like there's a lot of weird stuff like that going on. So in terms of portability, I don't know how great these things actually are unless you really know the environment very well. Okay, so I'm grabbing the input here. By far the least expressive. Like, I know that this works only because I have tests. But if I didn't have tests, like, I couldn't rewrite that for you. And maybe it's just I need to practice more. But same thing here. How do you trim the white space on either side of a string? Right? Well, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it in Bash, but by far the easiest way is to pass it to xargs with -0 or -0, and that'll do it for you. That's kind of insane to me, but whatever works. All right. In the other languages, how do you check that something is actually, a string actually has some kind of value to it? You either said it's not, right? Or you check the length is 0. What do you do in Bash? You do this. If, space, the space is important. If you don't have that space, this doesn't work, right? So if -z input, okay, so that means if we don't have an input, then echo and exit, right? Echo and, oh, it looks like I don't even exit here. So this wouldn't work. I should fix that. I won't, but I should. Okay, so now we have a while loop, and we're just iterating an index while it's less than the length of an input. Again, not super readable, but maybe if I had done more Bash before, this would be a little bit more readable. Grabbing a character, and then I can check if the character is alphabetical or not. So this is nicer than JavaScript, right? Because JavaScript doesn't even have that. But this is pretty nice. If then, I found I had to be more verbose when writing Bash. And now here, this is one of the best things about Bash, but also one of the worst things about Bash. I'm using TR. So TR is not built into Bash. TR is a program that happens to live on my computer. Almost certainly lives on your computer if you're on a Mac or if you're on Linux, right? So we can, let's just find out here. So if I say like man TR, right? Okay, here's my program. So this lives here, but this is not part of Bash. So it's possible that I could be on a program, I could be on a computer where TR doesn't exist, then my Bash script stops working. So I'll just prove that to you right here now. So if I do, sarc.sh, hey, like that. So it's working, right? And now let's say which TR. Okay, so I'm going to sudo move, user bin TR to user bin TR X, like that. Put in my password, which is banana123, always has been, always will be. And then now let's try and run my program again. And it doesn't work because I don't have TR on here. I can't shell out to TR, which, you know, how much can you really rely on your programs if you have to assume that the base system's also going to have certain programs? I think it gets a little bit tricky there. I will put this back before I have a panic attack later. So let me just see. Yes, okay, we're all back to normal, and then run my shell script. Everything works again. Okay, so shelling out, so calling other programs is really easy in Bash, but also it's kind of spooky because the program may not even be there. And Bash has no way, as you're writing this thing, my editor has no way to know like if this is going to exist at runtime. And I also realized that there is actually a way to do this in pure Bash. I forget what it is, but I guarantee you the syntax is terrible. 100% is terrible. Okay, great. And now just at the bottom here, we've got character index +1, and you have to have these double parentheses. Otherwise, this thing won't work. Why? Just because it's Bash. And there we go. So I would say like Golang and Bash are like the most different. Like they're very different if you want to actually like compare them. You know, with Golang you have so many guarantees. With Bash you have very, very few guarantees. If you're really good with Bash, you can write it really quickly. You can, you know, send somebody a Bash script and say, just run this thing and it'll probably work, right? In fact, some companies have it set up so that like if you want to install their program, they just say, okay, curl this and then pipe it into Bash. You know, dangerous. Probably shouldn't do that, but that is a thing that people do. You don't get that flexibility with Golang, but you also get no guarantees with Bash. And so I generally try and avoid writing, you know, shell scripts these days if I can. But it can be convenient if, you know, you just kind of want to roll the dice and say, well, this is probably going to be running on some kind of Debian system and this thing will probably be installed, you know, then maybe it's okay in that situation. Okay, we're nearing the end here. We're at our last language, which is PHP. And if you thought, wait, why are you doing scripting with PHP? It's a web language. No, PHP is a general purpose scripting language, just like Ruby, just like Python, just like JavaScript happens to be now. And a lot of people don't use it like that. And there's reasons that they might not want to. But you could, in theory, write a lot of things in PHP, right? So, you know, tools like, you know, Chef or Puppet or Ansible or something like that. Somebody could go ahead and write those in PHP. They don't. There's reasons they don't, but nobody's stopping them from doing it. So if you really want to write some weird code, you could do this. So I was a little bit surprised. I expected that PHP would be a lot more verbose than Python, or at least have a lot more lines, but that's not really true. Like if you look, it's about the same, right? They're very similar in terms of line count. PHP line for line reads worse than Python. And because they occupy the same space, you know, personally, I'd be inclined to pick up Python over PHP. If you've only ever done PHP or if you mainly do PHP and you're curious about Python, I'd check it out. I think there's a lot of nice things about it. Okay, so this is a weird artifact of PHP that you need to start all PHP programs with this tag. You know, that's just history. Now, this is the first language where I've had to do this. I'm getting my arguments and then I'm array shifting. So I'm taking off the first argument from my args, right? I want to get rid of that one that just says like sarc.php. In every other language, I've done this in sort of an immutable way where like I'm cloning and then, you know, taking off different parts from my new array. And this one, I'm actually manipulating the original array. Could I do this in another way? Yeah, probably, but I think this is the cleanest way of doing it in PHP, but it's also still pretty weird. Next, I need to take all of my arguments and put them as text. So my variables, they have $signs, and I mean, I don't know. You wouldn't choose to do it again this way, like if you're writing a language these days. So I think that's a reason to say that it's probably not the nicest thing. And then you've got names like implode and array map. You know, implode instead of like join or something like that. You get array map as a function instead of being able to call it, you know, actually on an array, because in PHP arrays are primitives. They're not objects, so you can't call methods on them. PHP does have arrow functions now. Maybe you didn't know that. It does have arrow functions. They're not as handy as they are in other languages, but they're getting there. In general, I just think if you look at the comparable line in Python, like the PHP line looks, to my eyes, a lot worse. Okay, this looks almost exactly like JavaScript, except I'm using PHP end of line character for ending the line. There may be a better way of doing that, but the print doesn't automatically do this for me. Okay, should uppercase, output. Okay, so now I'm iterating through a string with an old style for loop. Is there a better way of doing this? Not that I could find, but maybe you'll have better luck because it's a string, right? So I have to go through the string. So what I do is I call string length on the text, and then I use square brackets to grab that index in the text. Now, unlike JavaScript, there actually is a method to find out if it's an alphabetical character, so C-type alpha. And then I can do my same logic. And I've got a ternary, which should look pretty normal to you, except you might be confused by this, right? Because in PHP, string concatenation does not happen with a plus sign, it happens with a dot. And I'm, tempted to hate on that, but I bet you that I think that's a defensible choice, right? Because maybe I'm not adding things here. I'm joining them together. It's maybe a different concept. I don't know. And then, I print everything out. So, yeah. So not my favorite language. But the PHP ecosystem is phenomenal. Right? You have Composer, which Composer is better than anything, I think, in the Python world. Python has Poetry now, which is similar to Composer, but probably not as popular. And Laravel's phenomenal. And, Python has Django, which, is probably almost as good as Laravel, but Laravel's pretty amazing. But the language itself is just, I don't even think there are people who are really in the PHP community who love the language itself. Like it was built a long time ago to do a certain job, and it's kind of been, slowly improved upon. And, there are amazing PHP developers, but it's just not a language I would recommend to somebody to learn, unless out of curiosity. Okay, so now it's time for the big reveal. What's the language that I'm most interested in writing more of, that I want to get into, start playing around with more, maybe make it my main programming language? It's Golang. Never mind. It's Golang. That didn't work out. So I think that Golang is, kind of the sweet spot between being, fairly easy to read and write, but also at the same time, being fairly rigorous, right? You have your strong types, and you have a certain number of guarantees. Also, the fact that you can ship a binary to somebody, that's amazing. The fact that it's compiled, so it runs extremely quickly. I really like a lot of these things about Go, but I'm pretty new to it. And you know what? Knowing me, in a month, I'll absolutely hate it. I'll be talking about like no one should use Go. But, for now, I seem to like it, and I'm going to keep playing around with it. So if you made it to the end of this, that's really cool. Thanks. Let me know if you enjoyed this, if there's anything that you'd want me to change. I really enjoy talking about these kinds of things. I think it's kind of cool. I feel like you learn a lot about languages by comparing them with other languages. And I feel like that's true of programming languages, spoken languages. Those are the only two kinds of languages I know, but it's true of both of those, which is phenomenal. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. Talk to you later. Bye.